Should we do this Judge Jeanine thing? It's so crazy. Let's do this. Fox is 5. Judge Jeanine Pirro responding to former NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick speaking out against capitalism and white supremacy, of course.
$43 million in salaries, plus he had endorsements, plus he had Netflix. You know, I guess that capitalism has treated him pretty well. And the truth is, it's kind of like Bernie Sanders.
I don't understand the logic of this. I don't understand the logic of we're not going to take the critique of a thing from someone who has been deeply involved in the thing in such a way that it's successful, right? Like if you critique capitalism because you don't have a lot of money, it's sour grapes. And if you critique capitalism and you do have a lot of money, it is hypocritical. I mean, that's basically the formula, right? There's no way in which you can critique capitalism. It seems to me, if someone has had success within capitalism and says, like, I've been there and it's bullshit, that critique is pretty rock solid. But Judge Pirro, no, not good.
$43 million in salaries, plus he had endorsements, plus he had Netflix. You know, I guess that capitalism has treated him pretty well. And the truth is, it's kind of like Bernie Sanders writes a book, Trashing Capitalism. He makes over $2 million from the book. But, you know, the whole concept of white supremacy as being, you know, the enemy of anything and everything, you know, it doesn't really answer the question that, you know, if we're a free country and people have a free will and people succeed based upon, you know, the stats that Jesse was saying, having nothing to do with white supremacy, you know, you really just, you can't blame it all on that. And, you know, instead, maybe you ought to be looking at why is there so much black on black crime? Is that because of white supremacy? Why are kids in Chicago shooting each other? Is that because of white supremacy?
Sorry, pause it. This comes up so many times, and I think it might even came up in the Tim Pool debate. Like, the reason that certain communities are often like more about their own gun use and is because like the cops don't actually serve a function in there, right? Like they can't go to the cops to solve issues because like the cop for clearance rate for murder, something like that, are extremely low. So like, yes, it's awful, and it's a sign of like a societal failing, but it's not a sign of like, oh, black people are just naturally violent. It is actually white supremacy.
Well, that is it. I mean, like this is where, and I think I did see that moment with the other guy, whoever the other guy was like, you know, the reason why police over police black and brown communities is because that's where all the crime is. And the idea that, like, you know, in my mind, it's like, well, okay, let's tease that out. Why do you think that is? Because it's one of two reasons, right? It's either that there is something essential within, you know, black or brown people that make them more likely to commit crime, or there is a structure in society that has disempowered, that has created more obstacles to success, that has disinvested from these communities and given these communities less reason to invest in the idea of pursuing other paths in which to, you know, fulfill themselves, whether that's from like money or education, whatever it is. That has gone on for centuries in one fashion or another and has created this. Those are the only two real possible reasons. And like, even you want to talk like the lead thesis in terms of like, you know, why we saw such a drop in crime, not just in New York, but nationally and internationally, 20 years out from when lead gasoline was outlawed. Think of places where there's the greatest density of pollution. it is invariably in communities of color. And why is that? Because invariably over time, not every single community of color, but broadly speaking, when you have a group of people who have been systemically kept from having political power, they end up, and economic power, they end up in areas where the dumps are, or the electrical station is, or where there's highest, air pollution. I mean, we saw this in the context, I keep citing this because it just happened a couple of weeks ago. The IRS admitted that they did the research and they found that they were auditing black people at significantly higher rates than white people. And there is no race listed on your taxes. But why does this happen? It happens because the people with political power structured the nature of what our tax laws were and structured the nature of how this regulatory agency would go about executing its regulations. And the people in power happen to be white. I mean, happened to be white. They were white. And they were working in their own best interest. This is one form of structural racism. And that doesn't speak to necessarily intent. It's that people tend to put themselves first. Or in our society, white people started this society by putting themselves first. I mean, literally on day one.
Look at the unemployment for young black people, right? And like I mentioned the guns as like, okay, we can't depend on the cops to defend you, so you get a gun. But also like guns, when the only opportunities are things that like are outside of like the formal economy, it sort of rebounds on itself. That's where you get gang violence. Like this is all because of subjugated population economically doesn't have the opportunity.
Yeah, and if you have in this community, like, it's pretty straightforward. If there's no opportunity within the law, people become outlaws.
Yep.
I mean,
we had a whole genre of film in like the 50s to the 80s about white people doing that in the Wild West.